Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. This episode of the Marco Martins Revolution is brought to you by Vodcast TV, Johannesburg's premier shared podcast studio platform. If you've ever wanted to host a podcast for yourself or your business, then there's never been a better place to do it than right here. Visit vodcasttv.com/revolution right now and get yourself a discount on your first podcast or podcast series. My guest today is a dear friend of mine, Gary Berkowitz. I actually don't know how to introduce him because by trade, he's a realtor. Before that, he's a musician and owned a few different little entrepreneurial ventures. In the midst of that, I believe he continues in the entrepreneurial space. But what we're here to speak about today is very political. It's very economical. It's related to many, many things. So I suppose I could call him a social justice warrior. I think he might agree to that, although there's negative connotations online. But he's definitely a progressive and a modern liberal. My dear friend Gary, thank you for joining me. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
A revolution is a fundamental and relatively sudden change in political power. An organization which occurs when the population revolts. This is the Marco Martins Revolution, powered by Vodcast TV. Visit vodcasttv.com for more.
So I say my dear friend Gary, but I don't know if we're going to be friends at the end of this. I'm joking. So our own personal, that's actually how I want to start this conversation. And I want the audience to see it in the same way. The ideas that we share here are our own, first of all. They're completely our own views. They may not be perfect or correct. We might come across very impassioned about our views. However, we're just two human beings as well in saying that. And it doesn't mean that what we believe is absolute and the most true. So I'd like to start that off. And whatever points we disagree upon within this doesn't mean that I feel any less about you or you feel any less about me and our views. This is all coming from a place of respect. So I think I want to start it off there. Gary, welcome.
Thank you very much, man.
So let's start it off with the conversation we were having just before the camera started rolling, and we were talking about pay parity and this idea of, obviously the conversation started off with what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. And of course you brought up the thing of not asking, it being rude to ask someone what they earn. And you said it comes from a systemic place, where the man, society, doesn't want people to discuss their income because then we will, as a public, see the great injustice that's happening in non-pay parity in the world. That's caused by the societal thing. I think that there's a possibility of that in a small part. I am very much of the view that there is not some big cloak and dagger thing that's behind everything that's wrong in our world. I don't think that there's some group of people who are sitting maliciously behind the scenes building everything in such a way to fuck us all over. I don't think that's truly what's going on. I think it certainly looks like that at times because you see how systems aren't working and how it's specifically going in certain directions. And I think there might be fallout from a past that had a lot more of that than what we're getting right now. But I think that a lot of the idea of asking about somebody's pay, I think a lot of that comes from, or a lot of that being rude rather, comes from the idea of you don't want someone to feel inferior. You don't want people to feel embarrassed about their lower income. You know, money is definitely a point of power for a lot of people. It has been for many years, where someone with more economic wealth is in a higher social standing than you are. It's embarrassing to be on a lower social standing than someone else.
So I think what you said, I think that's the conditioning that comes from the man, where they say it's rude to ask someone else because it could embarrass them, it could make them feel inferior, etc.
So you think there's no reality to that at all?
No. I'm not saying that's totally incorrect. I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm not saying that doesn't happen in practice.
Right.
But I'm saying that's more the excuse reason rather than the real reason. So look, if I was going to draw it back just to the really big topics that all of this falls under. And this is really the be all and end all for me and everything I do and I want to do. So for instance, my job, I love my job. It comes to me very easy. I'm successful at it. It doesn't fulfill me. I'm not serving anyone. So the really, and sorry to be like this, I guess could be throwing spanners in the works, but like the really big themes that, at least to me, this all falls under is white supremacy, capitalism, colonialism, racism.
Okay, so let's delve into that. I think that, first of all, there is a true harsh reality. I'm not going to, when I argue against your points here in this, because I think that we will have some contrasting views on this. I'm not arguing that there isn't a distinguishable difference between what white people earn globally and what black people in particular, let's you know, for the same sort of work, for the same jobs, for the same thing. And in terms of general opportunity, access to certain employment opportunities that things like BEE just simply aren't solving, because there's a greater issue that I think comes from history. So I'm not denying that there is a lack of pay parity, especially from a racial standpoint. The argument may be that if we're fighting it from a perspective of saying, oh, there's some secret society that's keeping black people oppressed right now today, I think that may be detrimental to actually solving the problem, because I don't think that's true.
I'll just say the distinction here. So a lot of the time it's not necessarily I'm saying that it's an intentional thing. We are intentionally keeping black people oppressed, as opposed to apathy. We just don't care. So if I had to give you two examples, for instance, of something that's intentional and something that's apathetic, and I think you'll agree with me.
Yeah, so far I do.
So the apartheid government, that was very intentional oppression, where we are trying to separate, we're prioritizing, we are giving different sets of rights, and that's very intentional, how that ended up oppressing people. The ANC government, that's an apathetic oppression. They're not going out of their way to make the majority and the most vulnerable people in the country suffer. But by their choices, by their decisions, by their politics, that ends up happening. Just to give you the distinction of intentional versus from apathy.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good way of putting it. I think that's a very clear and obvious.
So the foundations of white supremacy, colonization, capitalism, that's very intentional. I mean, white supremacy, it's about putting the lighter your skin at the top, the dark your skin at the bottom, and from that creating a hierarchy of social class, and even to the point of you're not a fully fledged human being. You're 25% of a human being.
Right.
Now, of course, we don't operate as blatantly as that anymore, but there's still some intention there. But now I think it's a part of apathy. So now, for instance, people that are trying to address racism, people that are trying to address it and resolve things, they're being told, you're making too much noise. Racism has already been addressed. Look how far you've already come. So for instance, in America, with critical race theory, you have people saying that critical race theory is racist in and of itself. But all it is about is an actual true account of historical America in terms of race divide and contemporary Americans in terms of race divide and opportunities that are there or not there depending on your race.
If you don't mind, can we pick up from that point just to clarify what critical race theory is? Critical race theory is a theory that was presented in universities in the United States, and the reason it's a hot button topic right now is that it's something that's been taught in high schools in the United States at the moment. A lot of parents, particularly of white students, are very upset with critical race theory. They find that it's very racist because their children come home feeling the guilt and carrying the guilt of what their predecessors had done to people of color in the United States. So critical race theory is a teaching that is showing how the suffering of black people in particular in the United States in historical terms, and how that perpetuates their continued suffering to this day.
I would pretty much agree with that. Look, also, when I was giving my own thing, I'm thinking, is what I'm saying the actual definition or the actual correct thing to say?
Right.
So I'm just going to quickly give
a Wikipedia definition of what critical race theory is.
Sure. Wikipedia, critical race theory is a cross-disciplinary examination by social and civil rights scholars and activists of how laws, social and political movements, and media shape and are shaped by social conceptions of race and ethnicity. So, for instance,
yes, I mean, that's a very wordy way of saying they studied the history of oppression in the United States and how laws and things oppressed people, and then how that perpetuates the cycle.
And then you made comments like they were teaching that in universities and schools, and white kids were coming back home and feeling guilty and feeling bad, etc.
Yes.
Now, that narrative, I'm not saying that's never happened, but that narrative is a very conservative, right-wing narrative. In fact, they went so far to say it's getting taught in nursery schools, which was just a blatant lie.
Right. No, but okay. So first of all, it is something that is being taught in schools. Critical race theory is being taught in schools, not in nursery schools. It's in high schools.
Probably
and
not even primary school.
In university, not in primary school.
I don't even
it's
think
in
high schools. I think, if I'm not mistaken, only at university level. It's only a university level subject.
I might be wrong. Okay.
But what I'm
I
saying,
stand to be corrected, but from what my understanding is, the reason why the movement got so big about critical race theory is that it was taught in schools.
So to my understanding, that Possibly not even individual teachers. To my understanding, that was noise created by the right-wing conservative groups and people in America to detract
as a propaganda tool.
To make it, to demonize it. Instead of it. So here's the thing. So often when people just generally forget politics, just individual to individual, when someone does or says something wrong, when you try to hold that person to account just from one individual to another, not a theory about race or a political party to political party, just one person to another, you try to hold someone to account for what they've done and said. Often they can just turn it around and point the finger at you, even though they're the one that's done or said something wrong.
I understand. Okay, I get what you're saying. So beyond the idea of arguing whether or not it is actually taught in schools, and it is only taught in universities by people who choose those subjects, who choose social studies, some sort of social studies courses in universities in the United States, which they're paying huge money to be at. This isn't like some sort of public school. This isn't some sort of federal initiative. So we know that for a fact, there's been no federal issuing of critical race theory being presented at school level, at least not at a very minor level. From what I understand, there was some idea of individuals teaching it, but again, I'm no expert and I'm not there, so I can't outright say that critical race theory has been taught in schools in the United States.
I'm just going to give two examples in terms of information that people specifically either don't want to put out there, so we are oblivious of it, or they don't want to then deal with something that's uncomfortable and inconvenient to deal with, right? So for instance, for white people, and we can just say this as South Africans, when you start having like really frank, candid discussions with people on race in South Africa and what apartheid did and the legacy of apartheid, and there still are things that happen because of apartheid, not disregarding the ANC's corruption and their apathy,
yes, of course,
not disregarding them. More often than not, and I think we both had this experience, white people will get very defensive.
Yes, and I think a lot of that comes from, first of all,
it's uncomfortable.
It's okay, sure, it's uncomfortable. I think that what you see on social media, though, is that this topic comes up a lot when a politician uses apartheid as an excuse for their current failings.
I'm talking about
it's normal general interactions. So away from social media, whatever it is, if you just real life normal conversation,
family, friends, at a dinner table.
Do you find that it's an age issue greater so than things? So people of you see, but they're sufferers of conditioning, right? Generally, so people more conditioning than what we have.
Yes.
Sure. And let's put it this way: you gave a very beautifully articulate example in the beginning of this about very obvious and intentional versus the lack of empathy, right? So perhaps we are sufferers of conditioning long term, as in the fallout of historical conditioning, less obvious conditioning on people our age and younger, and people older than us are victims of more obvious, more blatant and more intentional conditioning. That's absolute certainty. So that's why people in particular older than us, if you have a race discussion with South Africans, white South Africans older than us, they'll become more defensive, and largely due to their very obvious and intentional conditioning.
In fact, sorry, and I always think of things that relate as we're talking.
Sure, of course, yeah.
So,
and I mean,
so that just made me think of, for instance, and let me know if I'm jumping around too much.
No, it's cool.
That made me think of what's going on with Russia invading Ukraine, right?
Yes.
Where I've been so perplexed by people that I've engaged with on social media for a very long time on different topics. And we've always been on the same page because generally we're progressive people. We want equity and equality for people. We don't like anyone being oppressed. And I can understand their reasonings and rationalizations, and some of them I even agree with, why Russia/Putin ever invaded Ukraine.
Yes.
But because of conditioning that they've gone through, or bias or propaganda because the thing, we don't realize we've been conditioned, right? No matter what Putin and Russia does, they always rationalize the decision, no matter what. No matter this massacre, that massacre, Putin threatening to use nuclear arms, there's always a deflection to, but America's worse.
Oh, yes. I agree completely with you.
So I'm just trying to put across, and these are adults, people that I regard as well-read, decently researched.
Absolutely.
And they cannot criticize Russia, Putin, no matter what they do. And it's just like...
I can tell you exactly where that stems from. And I think it's why it's so much more... Oh, please finish your thoughts. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, you're not interrupting me. I was just kind of about to assume what you're about to say in terms of...
Please do. Please.
In terms of how much support in the past Russia has given specifically to South Africa and the ANC.
I don't think so.
And the whole communist versus... Okay, so that's what I thought anyway.
Right, I get you. I don't think it's even that. I think it's a lot simpler psychology and very basic, and why it's so much more prevalent today in 2022 than it would have been in like a 2018. I think people were far more capable, or at least we were reaching a point of being more capable of nuanced conversation, of being able to perceive things from both sides of a fence. We were certainly going in a very good direction for that pre the COVID-19 pandemic. And what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic, first of all, a lot of people became isolated and alone during lockdowns. A lot of people stopped having human interactions to try and prevent this virus from spreading. The psychological impact of that cannot be understated. That is huge. The financial implications of it. A lot of people lost employment, lost job opportunity. Even if they continued to keep their employment, they're certainly financially less well off than what they were before. All of these individual factors have, for the first time, probably in our lifetimes, for a lot of people of some sort of level of privilege, no matter the color of their skin or anything, this has been the most obvious impact upon people's lives away from their own individual failings, right? So I am of poor financial wealth because I didn't study in school and I didn't get a good job, or I didn't want to study a degree, I didn't work hard, whatever, and I've now got a shitty job and I can't pay my bills, right? That's my own fault. COVID-19 started doing that to people without their own fault. It was absolutely something completely out of their control. And I think this created a lot of blame upon other people. I'm not saying this isn't something that hasn't happened before. I find a lot of people who have put their own lives into a detrimental point like to blame others because they can't cope with, or they just can't accept that and take responsibility for their own failings. So it's someone else. And this is where conspiracy theories become so popular. And when people fall into a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, they're more binary. So it's like, I've seen some of the horrible things that the United States have done. I can give you 10 stories about the United States. If 2 of them are true, they can be horrific, which they will be. There will be horrific stories from any country. And the United States is definitely not immune to it. They've done horrible things and continue to do so to this day. But if I gave you 10 stories, 10 horrible stories, and 2 of them are true, you're going to believe all 10. And that's the thing. That's the thing that's happening to people who have now lost the ability to see things with a nuanced perspective. And I think that is on both sides of the fence of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I think that there's a lot of people who are pro-Ukraine, rightfully so. I think the world largely agrees that Russia's in the wrong and condemns their actions, largely. But there are certain acts that both the United States, the European Union, NATO, whatever, there's a lot of action that all of these groups have taken that is not acceptable.
I agree. Yeah.
But you can't say that to someone who's extremely binary pro-Ukraine. And then you'll have a load of ludicrous stories by the president of Russia, Putin, that's being put out, and people who are anti-USA or something, probably because of their own insecurities, their own unhappiness, incontentment with their life, and inability to accept their own responsibility in that position that they've placed themselves in, has now got a vendetta against the United States, or a vendetta against politicians, a vendetta against the modern society, modern structure, capitalism, all of these things. It's a very personal vendetta. And then they go to the absolutes.
Where they'll sometimes end up betraying their own principles and values.
Exactly.
For instance, one person I think of is a very pro LGBTQI plus person. And Putin and Russia oppress those kind of people.
Massively.
But this person, just as one example, won't then criticize that happening because they're giving unconditional support to Putin and Russia because they're going up against NATO and America.
Yes.
So it's such a simplistic...
Yes, it's very binary. It's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
It also comes down, so that's on the macro scale. We bring it down to the micro scale, and we've all experienced this, where because we're friends, because you have a family member that you really love and like, they'll tell you something about someone else and you'll immediately believe whatever they say.
That's also true.
Immediately.
I think so.
You won't question, you won't find out if they're telling. I'm going to give you an example of an experience I had.
Sure.
And I was exactly guilty of this very thing. I was about 16 years old, maybe 17 years old. We were at a house party at a friend's house that went to the sister school I went to. I went to King David Victory Park. They went to King David Linksfield. So I had friends there that invited me. I went with friends that I was originally with at Emmarentia that ended up going to Parktown Boys. So they came with me to basically a Jewish house party, right? A friend of mine, I mean, if I just say first names, it doesn't matter, hey?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. A friend of mine named Grant. No. Basically what's happening, I'm just doing my thing. I'm away from my friends. I'm speaking to whoever. And a couple of the friends come up to me like, Gary, quickly, Grant's about to get fucked up, right? Someone's wanting to start a fight with Grant. Someone's wanting to beat him, something along those lines. So I go to wherever they're saying this is taking place. And as I get there, do I remember this correctly? Yeah, as I basically arrive, this guy, Josh, slaps Grant in the face like pretty solidly, right? I'm then up in this guy's face because I'm just reactively
blindly defending
Grant because he's my friend. I don't know what's going on, just defending him. I've never been in a fight in my life, right? So I've never thrown a punch. I've never had a punch thrown at me. This guy that I was getting involved in, I mean, I later on ended up seeing this guy once in Norwood with his hands covered with blood with someone else's face, right?
Okay.
If I ended up getting involved with this guy, he probably would have ended me.
Right, so he's a fighter.
He was a fighter. I've been this big since I've been that age. So I was bigger than basically everyone. I somehow got him to apologize to my friend Grant, right?
Right.
But this is what the actual situation was. Grant had taken advantage of a girl that was drunk.
And Josh was trying to defend the girls.
Defending the girl and trying to put him in his place for what he had done. And in hindsight, years later, me and Josh ended up being at another party or something together. And I was joking with him that I should have helped him fuck Grant up.
Right.
Not defended Grant. So I'm just saying, like, we're all guilty of, we have a bias.
Instinctual bias.
A bias to a family member, a friend. It can be in a political party for our own gain, where we're just going to support someone.
I think this is my biggest issue with first of all, very binary politics in the United States, is that there's a lot of policy that you won't agree with that will be at least part of your two-party system, right? So you're a conservative or you're a Democrat, liberal Democrat, whatever. And there'll be perhaps a lot from the Democratic Party that you don't agree with, but you will defend those same policies even though you don't agree with it because it comes from your party and it's part of your tribe. And it comes from this very old tribal instinct that human beings still continue to carry with us. That's part of our DNA of trying to be part of your team.
Keeping the status quo.
Well, yes. And it's a survival mechanism, is that we survived in groups. And if I'm in my group and I'm accepted by my group and welcomed by my group and welcomed by my community, I won't be ousted and ostracized and kicked out of the community and then starved to death somewhere. There were very real implications to not being accepted by your community in most of human history. And those implications have now disappeared. If you get ostracized by your immediate community,
especially when the communities are all apart from one another.
Exactly, at war.
Yeah.
Right, essentially at war. So I think a lot of this stems from that, is that it's like you get a very vocal minority of people who are making the most noise for either of these parties. And that's why they stand out. And it's why it's so easy to dislike conservatives. It's very easy to dislike someone who's a right-wing conservative because of the ludicrous things that most right-wing conservatives still continue to stand by.
Unless
things like the
right-wing conservative. In which case,
even still, so people who are conservatives, most Americans who are conservatives, I think that you'll find a lot of people from a non-religious standpoint would have supported abortion rights. And they'll be politically conservative because they believe in security. They believe in immigration control. They believe in certain things that are not necessarily bad things. You know, you have a discussion with a human being, like, should we have borders and at least regulate the people who are coming into your country because we have a finite amount of resources and we want to be able to accept doctors, lawyers, and certain people, but perhaps criminals, thieves, drug dealers, whatever, should be kept out of our country and should be the problems of another nation. That's not a ludicrous thing to say. But now immigration control, you're a conservative. You must be a bigot.
It's how you go about doing these things.
I agree. And I think that it's why Donald Trump was such a divisive leader, because he's not a leader. He's not a politician. He's a brash, egotistical, rich man who came into power because he seemed to be like one of the people. We're not talking about a nation of racist bigots who are trying to get rid of all the Mexicans and kick them out or whatever that went to vote for Donald Trump. Yes, you have some of those, and those are the ones that you see at a Trump rally in a MAGA hat. But a lot of normal average Americans voted for that man because they're sick of people like Hillary Clinton being under the control of China.
Also because they believed things that were said that weren't true.
Also true. So
for instance, a lot of people supported Trump, and I know some, even South Africans, because they believed him to be a good businessman. Therefore, he would run the country like a good business.
Yeah.
But he was never a good businessman. That was him branding himself as a good businessman. So
yeah, I mean, of course, if you look at any sort of financial study of Donald Trump and you see the amount of capital that he had access to pre-thing and what he's done with it compared to others who are more successful than him in the same realty space, have achieved greater wealth with less resources. So he's not some impeccably brilliant.
But this is the point I'm making about the information that people come across and they believe, and then they act on that information when it's not true information.
Look, that's politics anyway. It's
not just politics. I'm saying the same thing. If you believe,
of course, and you're relaying that back to your incident with your friend, for example, that it's like someone you defended blindly, even though he was blatantly in the wrong in that situation.
I believed, or I chose to take a side that was
completely the wrong
side.
I agree with you completely on that. And
can you see how some of the stuff we're talking about now ties into the whole thing of it's rude to ask someone what they earn? Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about religion.
I think so I agree that we should be tearing down some of those veils from society because it's no longer necessary. We've got larger scale communication now, like social media being this big villain of the world, the way that we see it. Sure, it's got bad things about it. Sure, it's being used by Russian troll farms to start conflicts in other countries. But in saying that, overall, if we try and continue to progress our mindset as human beings and become more kind and welcoming and open to other people's ideas, it's a beautiful place. It's a place that we can communicate ideas between each other in a respectful way without being violent, without being gratuitous, without being pushy, with accepting and listening and learning to other human beings. It can be a beautiful place in the future. So I think that we should be tearing down certain veils of what's rude to discuss. However, we need to be extremely careful about the way we do that, because there are malicious people in this world. There are people who are, first of all, hurt people, right? This old saying is that people who have suffered trauma and have not dealt with that trauma, have not treated that trauma, will ask you what you earn when they earn more than you just to make you feel bad. Do you know what I'm saying? This is a true reality. So there's certain things that we, from the past, that we're seeing as archaic and old and whatever. It's things that should not be done away with completely. However, everything needs to change in terms of how we see things rather than a set of rules. We need to see things as an act of kindness, an act of empathy, and treat people with respect. And you can keep all of it. You can keep all of the, it's rude to do this, ladies should do that, whatever. You can keep all of that. You can keep all of it as long as it's not a set of rules, as long as it's a bit of a guideline and it's a way of people treating each other with kindness. And you can break all of those rules as long as you're coming from a true place of kindness and empathy, and you truly want to assist, be kind, be genuine with a human being. And you can ask them, what do you earn? Do you mind me asking you, what do you earn?
It's about intention.
And you can do it. It's about intention. So I don't think that anyone has an issue with all of these rude ideals as long as it comes from the right place.
People, this is the whole thing. Remember, we get conditioned without knowing.
I understand what you're saying.
So people definitely have things with it. When you, for instance, there's some people, I can chat to them about religion, having just met them, right? There's some people that puts them off immediately. If I say talk about anything to religion, they can talk about politics.
I think that these rules, politics, religion, things like that are things that we say don't discuss because it causes trouble. But it's certainly something that we shouldn't. I understand the perspective of someone you've just met. Speaking about religion and politics and stuff feels like an attack on their ideology. It's not great.
Remember,
when it's
again,
someone you've just met.
It's about intention, remember.
I agree.
So
but how do people see your intention not having known you?
Because of the condition that we all go through. This is what I'm saying. So the world conditions us to say, no, this is uncomfortable. This is inconvenient. I don't like talking about this. I don't like talking about what the apartheid has done to black people and the legacy still of apartheid. It's making me feel a bit uncomfortable. And that's because these have all been conditioned onto us. And it's been normalized. It's not okay to talk about this. It makes me feel this way.
I have a more nuanced perspective on that. And I'm not saying that there aren't legacy issues from apartheid. There definitely are. There's no doubt about it. There are legacy issues of apartheid. However, I think a lot of people that I know who make these arguments are coming from the standpoint of they're tired of apartheid being used as an excuse for failures. And it's like this, and I'm not saying these aren't trigger words, right? These are definitely things that some white people use to excuse racism. Absolutely. Some people use words like...
Sorry to interrupt you. Name me one black-owned real estate company in South Africa today. How many years after our first free and fair elections?
I have a client, I've forgotten their name.
The company.
I've got a client who's a company, female black-owned real estate company.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're phenomenally good, and what they've achieved with what resources they've got and everything, they're phenomenal. I'll introduce you to them. I think they'll be a great set of people for you to talk to.
Okay, so look, one.
I know one.
So I'm saying you know one. I've never heard of it. You only knowing one actually kind of proves my point. There's only one in a country that is mostly black people.
I understand.
20 plus years after apartheid. I've never heard of them. I'm in the industry.
There's not been a rapid enough growth
because it's not convenient, it's not comfortable, it's not to the interest and benefit from where the resources already were held.
Absolutely, I agree. So people who are currently holding the resources aren't allowing those resources to be fed in to the correct areas that they should be. Can you see,
but that counters the whole thing of people still use apartheid as an excuse. Because of apartheid, people have this level of power and influence resources where they actually are keeping them to themselves.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I was saying I don't think that there aren't issues with it. I'm not saying that there are no legacy issues and that apartheid's been over for 20 years, stop complaining about it. I think that the thing that frustrates a lot of white people with the discussion is that apartheid is being used as a card, as a playing card.
Oh, no, but people will always see that.
People will always do that, right?
But that just speaks again to my whole thing of people aren't accountable for what they say and do. So they'll use excuses. They'll point the finger somewhere else. So there'll always be people. I'm just talking generally. There'll always be people that aren't going to take accountability.
And I'm not saying that there aren't racist people who aren't going to use the argument that I've just used. There are racist people who will be like, you're just playing the black card to someone who's really suffering from racial oppression. You know, someone who's suffering thing and it's like, oh, you're doing this to me because you're black. And then they'll say, oh, you're just playing the black card. You're just lazy. You're just this. There are racists who are going to use that, but that doesn't mean that it's not a real valid argument in other small, subtle ways. So like politicians, for example, the ANC using apartheid as an excuse continuously for their own personal failings. That's perhaps more heinous in a way, is that you're now not allowing accountability to you. You're putting it off to something like apartheid.
I totally agree with you on that point, 100%. But again, the key word there is politicians.
Sure.
See, politicians are always going to use, whether it's South African, American, they're always going to blame their own failings on something else.
I think it's politicians are in particular guilty of this. They are very, very specifically guilty of this because they use it maliciously all the time. But I think all human beings are capable of manipulating a scenario to their own benefit.
Of course.
Absolutely. It's a discussion we had about comedy on my last podcast. So listeners to the previous podcast will have heard this. I had a discussion with Waylene and we were talking about how comedians should be, ideally, and it has been since the ancient Greek times, the social commentators of the world. And they have comedic license to say what they want, ideally. However, you've had a lot of people who have used comedic license, have used the opportunity of comedic license to say fucked up things because they want to say fucked up things. Not because it's funny, not because it's good political commentary, but because them as individuals want to say hurtful, horrible things to certain groups, demographics, individuals, whatever. They are hiding behind the guise of comedic license to be able to say all of these horrible things. And the thing that's most heinous about that is the sacred nature of things like comedic license. It's sacred. It should be protected. But now you have people who want to have a commentary about rape, HIV, any hot button topic. Comedians should be the ones to open that up and let us laugh at certain things. I'm not saying laugh at rape, but open up a perspective and a conversation and things about these hot button horrible topics that shouldn't be discussed normally. And comedians should have the opportunity and the license to do it. But the people who take advantage of that comedic license are the most heinous because they are tainting comedic license for the people who should be actually using it. And I think that there's a lot of people who will manipulate the situation, who I use the analogy of priests, for example. It's definitely no coincidence that the statistics for Catholic priests were through the roof for child molesters, is that people who have a desire to commit sexual acts on children will place themselves in positions that allow them access. School principals, teachers.
And when it should be the exact opposite. Those people should be the most protecting children.
Exactly. That's the thing. But these people manipulate a situation to allow themselves access to those things. And it's the same thing with comedians. It's the same thing with school teachers, principals. It's the same thing with people of all sorts of groups, demographics, genders, everything, where there will be a few unique cases of individuals who are using what should be sacred as an opportunity to manipulate a situation. In the same way that Believe All Woman movement. And I was a great believer in that movement, and they got a lot of thing because of the sheer volume, the statistical volume of women who have been victims of some sort of sexual assault, whether it be minor or major sexual assault. And the difficulty in proving that is that you want to be able to believe all women. That's why it's so heinous when a woman artificially accuses a man of doing a sexual act on them. Not because of how, and I mean, of course, it's horrific for you to accuse a man of doing something that he never did.
Because you're affecting
the capability of other women being able to tell their story and be believed.
Yes.
That is probably the most heinous part of it.
Yes.
And me saying the most heinous part, can you think of anything more heinous than accusing a man of doing something so horrific when he's actually done nothing? There shouldn't be anything more heinous than that. But the knock-on effect actually is. It is more heinous than that, that individual's impact.
I always feel the need to just take, when people say man or woman, and just say accuse a person of something they haven't done. But no, I very much get what you're saying.
I'm using it very specifically because I'm talking about sexual assault.
Rape, yeah. Or sexual assault.
Yeah. I'm not trying to get into non-binary discussion and things like that. I'm using it from a broad statistical perspective of where the issue lies. And there are issues with men and women. And obviously there are deeper issues that thing. Again, we're talking about, now we're saying a person, right? Because we're trying to be...
No, I wasn't even saying that from a non-binary thing.
Okay.
I was saying in the sense of just being in a patriarchal world, that it's always like, for instance, even one of my favorite quotes, it says, there's one thing that you can take from a man, the last of the human freedoms. So I just like to update that to say that
A person.
So
Yeah.
I just want to, and I think like all of these things are quite related. I want to throw some thoughts and things onto you and see what you think about them.
Sure,
right?
please.
So the whole that narrative, you mustn't help someone else until you've helped yourself. You've heard that. We've all heard that.
Yeah.
First, help yourself before you help someone else.
Yeah.
Right? I've been told that. You've probably been told that in your life. We've heard it going around. You need to sort out yourself before you can help someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think of that, where that kind of narrative comes from. Compare and contrast that, for instance, to the narrative, it takes a village to raise a child.
I think that, again, I will come to every point with a very nuanced perspective. It's who I am as a human being, and I think that's where reality lies. Reality lies between two planes almost all the time.
Let's start on the first one. Right?
Let's start on the first one. You can't help someone else. I think that it is good advice in certain ways, but like all good advice, when taken the wrong way, it's destructive, right? So on an aeroplane, help yourself before you help someone.
That people always use that example. That you first have to sort out your oxygen.
But it's a good example for the absolute.
That's a fantastic example.
For the absolute.
No, not the absolute. Specifically on one example. Where you need to help yourself first.
So that you're able to help others.
That's not, I don't...
Do you not think that stems into psychology in any way?
I see what you're saying.
Do you not saying that, like, if I'm constantly trying to be Mother Teresa and give people good advice and be assistants and whatever, I think there's great benefit to that. I think that if you have the capability to help other people, you are in turn helping yourself. This village to raise a child, absolutely. Yes. However, if you are so mentally ill, if you are suffering such great trauma, you have less capacity to help others until you've worked on yourself.
100%.
So it is good advice. However, again, it's detrimental advice when it's taken in the wrong way, where it's like, walk past a homeless person and it's like, I need to help myself first because I haven't paid my rent yet this month. Fuck him. Okay. He doesn't need an extra $5,000.
Okay, so look, you mentioned that you operate a lot on the nuances. So I just want to, I very much operate as much as I can on the general, on the majority. So of course there'll always be the exceptions, there'll always be the outliers. The example of, which is the perfect example for this, what we're talking about on the airplane with gas, with oxygen, you need to first do yourself before your child, because if you faint, you can't. I understand, that's a great example to speak against it. I'm just speaking generally to say, when people say you must help yourself first before you help someone else, they don't, but then they don't say to what extent. To what extent must you be mentally okay to help someone else? To what extent must you be financially okay to help someone else? So I'm just saying that's a very Western narrative.
I don't think so. I think that it's good advice that's now being taken once again by people because... And we can get into a religion discussion after this.
I was
almost good.
I'm going to follow this up.
Yeah.
With a religion point.
Yes, I agree. I think that almost all of it is anything from leadership sort of standpoint is intentionally ambiguous to a certain extent, so that the interpretation can be altered to suit whichever party. This is the malicious way of doing things, right? It's the idea of that the Bible, in a Christianity religious standpoint, it says this, actions. You can always interpret something. It's almost written in a very ambiguous way because people can manipulate that and interpret it to manipulate things to benefit themselves. But it doesn't make that bad advice. Helping yourself before you help others is really good advice for a lot of people. However, people are going to use it as an excuse to go about doing things their way. Yeah. And I tell you what, right now, Gary, you can give them any contrasting advice to that, and they will find a way to manipulate it into their own way. And that's what my belief is with that. It's like sayings like that. People will find another saying or another one to benefit themselves and justify their actions. And this is my view on capitalism. This is my view on socialism. This is my view on all of those things, is that until, my great hope for the future, and I'm going to close off on this, and hopefully we've got a little more time to get into what you wanted to say. We do have a little. My hope for the future is that technology is one of the things that assists us in getting to a point where we allow less greedy, powerful people to control the whole system. Because I think capitalism is actually a fairly good system. If you look at the history of all mankind, there's less injustice in a capitalist state that we've been in recent years.
We'll agree to disagree on this. We don't have enough time to really get into this point.
Sure. But hopefully technology is one of the things that makes either Marxism, socialism, capitalism, whatever. Hopefully technology is one of the things that allows us to succeed in this.
Yes. In fact, I'm not going to say anything now.
We'll do this in another episode, but I think we largely agree in a general way.
Just to follow on, it takes a village to raise a child, and first help yourself before you help someone else. Here's an interesting thing to think about that I just recently thought of myself, right? Mm-hmm. Do you know approximately how many Buddhists there are in the world?
I don't.
So there's approximately, if I'm not mistaken, 350 million. 350 million Buddhists. Do you know how many Jewish people there are approximately in the world?
No.
A fraction of that. And like a fraction, right?
Yeah.
Now, who has more of an influence on the world, Jewish people or Buddhists?
Okay. I think Jewish people definitely have a bigger influence globally, at least on economics, politics, and everything.
Even though it is a fraction of their number compared to Buddhists, right?
Yes.
So we can agree that the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, basically dominate the world and how the world runs.
Yes.
Right? America is a Christian nation. Russia is a Christian nation.
China has great influence on the whole world, but they're a non-religious nation largely.
Thank you for that point. I never even thought of that. No, solid point. You're right. I never even thought of that because it's confirmation bias, because it doesn't confirm my view here. Solid point, solid. But the world is typically run by Abrahamic religions, right?
Yeah, because of their success in post-colonialism world, right? Their military success on the entire planet.
Their resource success.
And their resource success through the African continent, things like that, right? It's just, history is written by the victor. It's pretty simple.
But it's also about what each religion's intentions and values and stuff is, right? I'm not saying what it's supposed to be from the text. Yeah. I'm saying what it actually practically exists in reality.
I think that religion and Judaism is actually, it feels like something that you're attacking a little bit now at the moment.
I'm attacking all Abrahamic religions.
Yeah, what I do, and one of the reasons, let me explain why.
Let me just finish this point.
Oh yes, of course, please, yes.
Did you know that Buddha, because Buddha was an actual person.
Yes.
Did you know that Buddha and Socrates lived basically at the same time, just in two different parts of the world?
Yes, right? Although Buddha is believed by some historians to have been multiple people.
No,
or being placed into.
No, but there's someone named Gautama. Why did I just forget his name? Siddhartha Gautama.
Okay,
that was his name. The Buddha was one person named Siddhartha Gautama. Now imagine the world we live in. The value system and the principles operated a lot more according to Buddhism and Socrates than to the Abrahamic faiths. Do you see the point I'm making?
Yeah. Togetherness and all sorts of things.
Essentially, we would call it from an African perspective, we would call it Ubuntu. The Buddhists, whatever Buddhist practices are, essentially align perfectly with whatever Ubuntu practices are.
Yeah, look, that's not to say that there aren't toxic individuals within each of the communities either, right? Is that if you watch a documentary like Wild Wild Country, where you've got Osho, this wise guru who's now created a beautiful sex cult that everyone thinks, and then it becomes this crazy hot mess because of the conflict with religious, like
we actually had family friends, one of who was like quite high up in that whole thing,
in the Rajneeshpuram. Yeah, and I mean, wild. It's a cult. Yeah, it's not a cult. It's not like this beautiful, idyllic thing. And like, who's to say they wouldn't have succeeded in creating something beautiful if there wasn't outside factors trying to interfere with what they were doing? But it was a cult, right? And and to this day, I still see people posting stuff on social media, like quotes from Osho,
Yes.
and then it says the Osho. I'm like, my man, do you know who that is?
Yeah.
Like, do you know what that guy was doing? Like, I don't know if you should be posting that.
No, 100%. But,
You know?
but see, that's the exception. I'm talking
Of course,
the rule
of course.
Buddhism.
Yeah, I agree. You generally, and I think it's how it pertains to vulnerable people, right? Is that if you introduce a vulnerable person to Christianity, or if you introduce a vulnerable person to Judaism, or if you introduce a vulnerable person to Islam, or if you introduce a vulnerable person to Buddhism, the teachings of Buddha, Socrates, things like that would perhaps be more beneficial to vulnerable individuals than some of the more
I would
traditional.
say all individuals.
I would say that we as human beings no longer need faith to be a determining factor at anything.
But see, Buddhism and Socrates is not religion or faith. They're not gods.
It's life teachings.
It's life teachings, it's
life
way of
skills,
living.
way of living. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. Yeah, there's no way of disagreeing with that. However, I feel like there's no, and I'm not going to oppose anyone who goes and seeks out a life to be taught by these sort of value systems and things like that. However, I feel like we inherently have good value systems as human beings. I think we inherently do.
No, I'm saying we. This is how I see it. I think we have inherently good value systems as human beings in the same way that puppies will always get on with each other and other animals. And then from conditioning. So we all naturally have good value systems. But then with the world we live in, the conditioning, the hierarchies.
And then
propaganda.
circumstance, right? It's not like necessarily malicious conditioning or societal conditioning or whatever, just circumstance. Like, I'm hungry, so I fight because I'm hungry. Things like that.
But most people are hungry, for instance, because the color of their skin is not the same as ours.
Yes.
Most people, I'm saying it's a simple, like for instance, I was fortunate enough to get born into a well-off Jewish white family.
Yeah, but the reason why there's so much less hunger in the world is because of capitalism as well. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you said, if you look at it from...
There's been improvements, 100%. There's less hunger today than there was 10 years, 20 years ago.
There's less hunger today than there was 100 years ago, for sure.
No, but I'm saying even 10 years ago. Of course, 100 years ago, yeah. But the thing is, that's like just being, of course there's going to be improvement.
And again, also beyond that is that, and these are, I know that capitalism is like this big nasty word to almost everyone under a certain age, but it has created great things. I like cars, I like cell phones, I like the internet, I like that I've created a podcast studio.
Yes,
I've got this business.
You're saying all these things as if they wouldn't have been created in a society that operated under Buddhist principles, for instance.
I believe that there would be an inferior level of growth without the motivation of a capitalist system where you get some sort of financial retribution. There's some sort of financial benefit to creating the best thing, the new thing, the next, to continue to progress, to get better and better and better and stronger and faster.
So
and
I think everything would be better if the system wasn't a system that's favored the individual over the group.
So I think that we should have more public governance, more public regulation into capitalist systems. For me, ideally, I think that as much as I like an iPhone, I don't like that it's made in a sweatshop in China and that there's certain people who have to suffer so that the phone is an affordable price point for me. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. So I don't like that side of capitalism. However, I think that
under a social system, we wouldn't have this kind of technology, basically.
I don't think so.
Yes. What's your definition of socialism? How would you define it?
So socialism is the equality of outcome for all people within a certain region. So say you create a socialist country. You bought off that country. All people who are born and live in this country have an equal outcome, equal access to all things. And then the reward for their achievements is equivalent to those of others. That's how a socialist system works.
I think you described more communism than socialism. But I'll give you...
Yeah, it's just communism from a governance standpoint. But give me the definition of socialism.
So this would be a definition.
Please say it into the microphone. Sorry. No problem.
So a political and economic theory of social organization, so political and economic, of social organization, which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole.
Right.
So it's not saying everyone gets equal stuff.
It's just the community decides who gets what. rather than a
and
government.
how stuff is organized and how it's distributed, etc. So
That's why I like social capitalism, right? Like you see countries that have far more social capitalist systems, right? Like Sweden, for example.
way more successful than America.
Way more.
All of those countries,
So
Denmark,
yeah, but that doesn't mean that they're not capitalist.
No, because look, there's never been a social nation that's ever existed because this capitalist world won't allow it to
I
happen.
suppose Pol Pot was a socialist in a way.
It's never there's never existed a social country. I'm just saying we've yet to have a country which, all in all, was socialism. For instance, if you look at Cuba, right?
Yeah,
Cuba might be the closest. They've got incredible literacy rates. They've got incredible health system, but the embargoes that's been put on them by America for decade upon decade upon decade keeps them down. Recently, there was a vote by the United Nations where every single nation, with the exception of 2, America and Israel, voted to release the embargoes that have been put on Cuba for decades.
Okay, I understand. And Cuba, their relations in the 1970s with the Russians during their communist period didn't help.
That's 50 years ago.
It's a long time ago. I understand. And let's talk about people like, trying to think of his name.
Che Guevara.
No. Che Guevara is a freedom fighter, the actual leader of Cuba. You'll think of it now. Anyway, Cuba is one small example. Libya can be another example that you look at where it's like their literacy. Is it Libya? Am I thinking the right place?
So
it's Libya. Yeah, they had big literacy rates during...
With Gaddafi.
Yeah. You know, and their literacy rates were quite high and their education was pretty good. But they were under an oppressive individual dictator ruler, right? It was a socialist sort of system, but it was one person in charge making all the rules for everyone because he knew better. Therefore, and that was the same.
But therefore, it's not a socialist system.
No, but it was a socialist system, right? It was more communist, probably,
could say
by definition. But in the same way as that, these definitions in politics are quite odd anyway, right? Is the idea of fascism having a definition that it's, but meanwhile, we already have a definition for fascism before the birth of fascism, and that was totalitarianism. Am I correct? You know, in my opinion, fascism
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah, you see.
Which came first, let's say, yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely fascism was created pre-World War II by...
The
Italians, by... what was...
Franco.
No.
It's the Spanish Civil War. Sorry, it was actually the Spanish Civil War, I think.
Well, it was created by a freedom fighter or a rebel, an Italian rebel who became the leader of Italy during World War II. Mussolini. Fascism was created by him. The Fascism Party was created by Mussolini in the north of Italy, where they were fighting against the government's regulations, and they wanted to create the Roman Empire once again. This was the ideals of the fascist party, and that's where fascism became the term because the Nazis were perceived as fascists. No one wanted to call them the National Socialist Party. You had to call them something else because it wasn't good for the name of socialism, so people call them fascists. But they were socialists by their own definition.
So just so you know, what's quite interesting, what the Nazis called themselves as National Socialists is the only time that term has ever existed. So for instance...
but who cares what people call themselves anyway?
No, words have meaning and they have power, and it's what...
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that if I call myself something, it doesn't make me that.
No, but there's a difference between just an individual calling themselves something or an entire political party that's taken their principles and values from a specific political ideology, etc., etc. So, for instance, Bernie Sanders. Think of this as a thing. The Nazis were National Socialists, right? Bernie Sanders is a social democrat. It's describing the type of democracy.
Okay.
What the Nazis were was describing the type of nationalism.
I like Bernie Sanders a lot, and he's exactly the sort of social systems that I think should be put into place. I think that the elite wealth who are running away from paying taxes and avoiding it by having relationships should be held accountable to pay the same taxes as the normal average American. And those taxes should be used for social systems. It's the most obvious non-brain dead idea out of anyone ever in American politics, and he was ostracized for it. So I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders. I can tell you are too. That Bernie Sanders had actual good ideas that would help America get to a place where they'd be more like Canada, where they'd have free healthcare, they'd have free education.
He would have criticized and held Israel a lot more to account than anyone else, ironically being a Jew himself.
Maybe he would have.
No,
I don't know. He does in general.
He does in general.
And but in saying that, I don't know what his relationships would be like with China. And that's, you know, it's very hard to say anything good about Donald Trump ever, but his relationship with China and holding China accountable for what they were doing, he was the best at that. And that was the one thing that he did well. So let's celebrate small victories for absolutely anyone. You'll never celebrate a thing Donald Trump's ever done.
Not about that. I doubt I'll have to come across that and read it. I doubt what you're saying is correct. I think what you're saying
absolutely.
I'm saying, I would say until I've researched myself, I would say what you're saying is a similar narrative to Donald Trump was a good businessman, where he branded himself as a good businessman. I think he branded himself as being good with China. I don't know if he actually was good with China.
He actually was. He introduced some very good policy that increased. Yeah.
Yes. So I've heard him talk about all that stuff. I've heard him talk about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but also he can't force things through Congress that fights against it, right?
Well, here's the thing. I mean,
there's certain things that he passed, but there's certain things that he didn't.
Remember, Donald Trump likes to take credit for everything. He likes to take accountability for nothing.
Of course.
So therefore, there's a decent chance that whatever happened with China, if it did happen, wasn't him. He was just taking credit for it.
Well, he definitely...
Just like the vaccines.
So anyway, he takes a lot of credit for certain things that he shouldn't. And there are some things that he said during COVID-19 where he's like monoclonal antibodies, this and that, which turned out to be excellent advice. It turned out to be really good in the end.
No, that's, of course, but that was upheld by the medical community.
Before.
He said the most ridiculous misinformation again and again and again on COVID.
Like what?
Sorry.
You're getting lots of calls. It's okay.
He said, it's going to go away. It's no more dangerous than the flu. It's going to go away in summer. He spoke about injecting bleach.
And then the UV one was the crazy one, right?
UV. So I'm saying Donald Trump.
UV treatment.
Donald Trump is directly responsible for over 100,000 preventable COVID deaths. 100,000 souls on this planet would still be here if not for Donald Trump spreading misinformation.
On Twitter.
On Twitter, on live, on TV.
Okay. How many people would be dead because of misinformation spread by the World Health Organization or by...
But what, they were intentionally spreading misinformation?
No, not intentionally.
Therefore, it's not misinformation. Misinformation means you're intentionally spreading it.
Do you think Donald Trump intentionally spread misinformation? You don't think he's just a dumb idiot?
No, he admitted to it. So on a whole bunch of...
First of all, Anthony Fauci, right, intentionally told people that face masks don't work and they're not effective in the thing because they needed them for healthcare workers. Cool. That's a noble thing, right? Is that you didn't want people to go rush out and buy all the face masks because it was more important for healthcare, so you lied.
So hold on. So again, I'm not just like, I've heard of that. That's not the first time I'm hearing that.
Yeah.
But again, that could be a right-wing conservative narrative that's put out there. Let me give you a good example.
So read up on that one.
Let me give you
that's true.
Let me give you a good example and you'll know what I'm talking about and you'll agree one way or another. So you can agree that Biden does inappropriate stuff, crosses boundaries with women, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. So we can agree, right?
Yeah.
Now, what the right-wing conservative have done is they labeled him as a pedophile, right?
Okay.
Now, there's lots of people that, because of the way it was framed, because of the narrative they came across with this video snip or this picture, and then Donald Trump Jr. or
Joe Biden's son as well.
No, that's a different thing. I'm saying that's a different thing. And I'm not saying he also is guilty of shit, right? I'm just saying that Biden does very inappropriate stuff. Biden crosses boundaries. That doesn't make him a pedophile. He's doing all this stuff on live TV, right?
Right. So like, okay.
Right?
I agree with you.
He's not intentionally, he's not doing it from a sexual, he's not doing it with sexual intentions.
He's just a creepy grandpa.
He just has incredibly bad boundaries, and what he thinks is appropriate is totally inappropriate. You see the difference of intentionally spreading misinformation or spreading misinformation. It comes back to doing something because you're not concentrating and not focusing enough, as opposed to that's your intention.
Right.
So Trump intended to spread misinformation because he didn't want the markets freaking out. He wanted the economy to stay where it is. He admitted this. So I'm saying I've seen him admit that himself. I've seen him say those own words.
I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like Joe Biden either. I don't like any of those motherfuckers. Bernie Sanders is okay. And I kind of like Andrew Yang as well. He seems pretty cool. Gary, thank you so much. This has been an absolutely awesome conversation. I think we should perhaps discuss more politics in future. We didn't disagree enough.
Thanks, my friend.
Bad on us. But thank you, my friend.
We did actually agree quite a lot, eh?
But this is the whole thing, is that if two human beings sit in a room, even if they're from completely contrasting sides, if you sat here with a right-wing conservative and had an actual conversation for long enough from a perspective of both of you not trying to prove a point and just trying to have a conversation about what you believe, we'll agree on a lot more than what we disagree on. And that goes across all boundaries, because we're all human beings. We all want the same thing. We all want everyone to be happy. We all want everyone to be fed. We all want everyone to be have healthcare and be healthy and happy and whatever. We all want that. We just disagree on how we get there.
Right-wing people don't want all people to have that.
No, I disagree with you. Some people who are individuals who have benefits.
The distinction between conservative and right-wing.
Okay. Yes. Absolute right-wing people. I mean,
not even absolute. People that are right-wing. I'm saying people that subscribe to right-wing beliefs. They consider themselves superior. We're talking about guys on the back of a pickup truck, thing. And there's some people as well who are in office buildings doing it as well. I agree. But those people are still the exception to the rule and not the rule. And I think that most human beings are just good people. We just want everyone to be treated kindly, and we want everyone well fed and whatever. And that's most human beings. That I agree.
So I think you'd have a hard time having a discussion like this and really disagreeing on most points. We can disagree on a few, but we'll agree on most things. Anyway, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, my brother.
This has been a Marco Martin's Revolution episode. If you want to host a podcast, something like this one that sounds and looks a little bit like this, be sure to head on over to vodcasttv.com/revolution to get yourself a discount on your first order of a podcast or podcast series. For me, for now, it's goodbye.